Hi everyone, so here we are today with Michael. Now, Michael is an expert of a different kind. Unlike, I would say being an expert, or rather, I would say like a coach, whom we ask, like, okay, what do we do for this sport? What do we do for maybe, getting faster or getting stronger? Michael is someone who's researched. He knows more than a coach, I would say, because he's actually researched the topic from an academic point of view. So before I get in there, let me ask Michael, you tell us about now bodybuilding as a sport. From an academic point of view, what has been your research? What has been the topics that you've looked at, and why? Why did you do that?
Yeah, so as I also described in my book, Muscular India, is over the period of roughly 10 years, I've done extensive research in 4 cities in India: Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, and Chennai, where I interviewed and spent time with bodybuilders and fitness trainers. And one of the things that I was really interested in is how did they themselves had actually become trainers, and how had they become muscular. So in a sense, I was interested in, with what had it taken them to transform themselves.
So it was, when you say research, it was your PhD on this topic itself, or was it for the book that you?
Actually, at the time, I was employed in Delhi with a new university. It was after my PhD, so this was a new project, and so they had allowed me to do the research while I was working for this new university. And so by training, I'm an anthropologist. I'm a social scientist. So we are primarily also interested in the social and the cultural, what determines how you do certain things in life. And in my case, I was particularly interested in when you look at India, and I had witnessed this firsthand, that for instance in Bollywood, more and more of the actors were actually sporting large muscles. And parallel to that, in urban India, you could really see a change. There was suddenly gyms everywhere. I was interested in who works there and who has achieved this goal, and what is this about? What is this body exactly about? What does it signify? So these were the kind of questions throughout my research that I kept coming back to as I met more and more guys. Different shapes, different sizes, not all of them enormous bodybuilders, some of them simply lean or muscular. And the more I got into it, the more I started to understand the different aspects of that life world, of that.
How was bodybuilding research different to other research you've done? What was it that was, just that stood out compared to when you spoke to, say, bodybuilders? They're not your average subject, where research is done on. What did you find different when you spoke to bodybuilders?
Well, in the past, I've done a lot of research, for instance, under international students from India and Australia, and these tended to be all people who came from English-speaking backgrounds. I would say that was a big difference to this more recent research project, where the people I met in the gyms, the gym trainers and the bodybuilders, generally came from vernacular backgrounds. So they had grown up speaking Hindi or Marathi or Tamil at home, and they'd gone to Tamil medium or Marathi medium. They hadn't gone to an English convent school, to a St. Joseph's or something. And it also meant that in articulating their ideas to me, they sometimes struggled a little bit, as did I, because my knowledge of, for instance, Hindi and Tamil is fairly limited, so we had to make do. But it also taught me something very important, that a lot of these guys actually are from new middle class backgrounds, upwardly mobile in what we say socioeconomic terms, so in social terms, but also economic terms. And they were new middle class in that belonging to the middle class was a very recent development in their lives. They hadn't been middle class for a while already. And if I look back on other research projects I did, which were also among Indians, because the focus in my research has always been India. These were generally people who had been middle class for a couple of generations already, and they had gone to English convent school or English medium, So they belonged to an older middle class. So the guys that I met in the gyms and in the bodybuilding competitions, they were newcomers. So that was a big difference. And in talking about their lives, that also meant that they talked very differently about their life in India and who their parents were, what their family lives were, what their expectations were, for instance. Yeah.
Their struggles too would be very different to the other class that you speak about, international students, versus a bodybuilder going through two probably different challenges completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only in terms of economics, surprisingly, because new middle class families can sometimes be quite well off financially. So that wasn't always the big difference. A lot of this was about social difference. So people who had been part of the middle class for a longer time and who had gone to English medium education generally had a kind of sense of being middle class and had a bit of a sense of where they belonged in society.
Right.
Whereas these newcomers were still figuring that out. And I think a big difference there was also that their parents couldn't really help them with that. You know, their fathers sometimes still operated a small food stall or a market stall, or they worked in construction. And what their kids were now doing, working in a gym, competing in a bodybuilding competition, was very far removed from what their parents had ever done themselves.
Now my next question is about the difference in bodybuilding. I'm sure you followed other sports, over time, various different ones we all follow. Bodybuilding is one of those very, I don't know if I could say it odd, but it's different. Because firstly, competition-wise, there's no actual movement. There's no real, they're not boxing each other or they're not playing with an equipment. People get on stage, pose. And it's also very subjective. And I think that's one of the biggest things, right? Somebody wins and there's always a complaint, but the other guy looked much better. He was much more physically sort of cut, and the muscles were much better balanced, and so on and so forth. What have you found to be the difference? What was like, did it hit you that is it a sport? Is it a lifestyle?
I think first and foremost, yes, absolutely. It's a sport. I mean, it's highly competitive. It demands enormous sacrifices from your body. And so, but it's, I guess, also a very different sport than any other sport in that winning is really only done through the way your body looks. Whereas any other sport, you use your body to accomplish sort of another thing. Like a soccer player uses his legs to score a goal. A boxer who comes closest, I guess, in terms of muscularity to a bodybuilder maybe, uses that body to land a punch. And as I described in my book as well, the only thing a bodybuilder really does with his body in terms of launching a punch is a mental one. Like, you want to impress the audience. And that is in itself, of course, a nerve-wracking thing for many of them, because you're on the stage, you're wearing a tiny piece of underwear, and your whole body is on display, and then you're faced with a huge crowd. I think the big difference is that in any other sport, it is not necessarily about how the body looks, even though often it looks good. In fact, some of the biggest bodybuilders in India that I interviewed were kind of lamenting the loss of a more flexible body. They were of course super proud of what they had accomplished. They had lots of fans, but in confidence they would sometimes also tell me, he said, I remember this one guy, he's a good friend of mine, and he's become a good friend of mine over time, and he would say, when I was at my peak, it was so hard to walk. It was so hard to do normal things. That body the muscles would literally be in the way, where for ordinary humans like you and me, our belly might be in the way. He thought his body, was in a sense an annoyance as well. And I think this is another aspect of it. Once you reach a certain stage, you grow over a certain threshold, the bodybuilder's body doesn't become a very handy body to have anymore. Not the way a soccer player who is at the absolute summum of his game will still have a kind of body that will easily run up the stairs. For the bodybuilder, that's not the same.
And sometimes I think even from a strength point of view, most people when they are at their peak in sport, whether it's tennis, boxing, badminton, or any sport, when you're at your peak, you really at great point of functional sort of movement. You can just move, like you said, run up the stairs. Maybe if you have to do something very quick, you
Yeah.
can, because you're at your peak. Whereas on bodybuilding competition day, I think the bodybuilder looks fantastic, but is probably at his weakest.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
it's, and I think that's maybe a again unique thing of the sport.
Yeah.
Uh, Now my next question in the same regard is, what is the difference you have found in your research here between Indian bodybuilders, Western, European, American, and those guys are just large. India has picked up maybe over the last few decades. But what is the difference? Have you found, is there a difference in the way bodybuilders approach things overseas from the research that you've done and the way it is done here? Is it more of a hit or miss? Is the knowledge as great as out it is elsewhere?
The knowledge, in a sense, is and is accessible. I think the big difference is economics, is money. Bodybuilding is
It's an expensive sport. It's an expensive sport.
It's a very
Very
expensive
expensive
sport. It has definitely improved in India. When I started following this, a lot of guys were really kind of scratching their heads on how to determine what was good knowledge that would really do something for their body and what was probably risky. And they were relying a lot on all the bodybuilders in India that would give them some knowledge, but there was also a lot of competition for that knowledge and people wouldn't give it freely, so there was a lot of experimentation in the beginning. There was certainly a lot of casualties. I mean, some people I interviewed in the past are no longer with us, and they were young guys when they passed away. And so, there was definitely risky behavior. I think with internet and social media, in a sense, it's become a lot easier for Indian bodybuilders, for instance, to seek the services of international bodybuilders.
Yes.
And that's become a huge marker because bodybuilding in itself, the competition, the prize-winning money in most competitions is very low. Certainly if you compare it to the investment you need to make to your body, right? I mean, the investment is huge, payoff is low, certainly in terms of prize money. In India, I've been to competitions where, it may be a lakh, but a lakh isn't much if you've had to work towards that stage for half a year with protein powders, with various substances that you can't get over the counter. So, and you have to mind and you have to eat a lot. I mean, eating is another thing. It's a very costly eating business, all these proteins. So a lakh doesn't neatly cover that in the least. But, and I've been to competitions where, guys win a motorcycle. The motorcycle also you can sell off, but, mostly the guys I interviewed agreed that, participating in a competition you weren't doing that for the money, you were doing that for potentially, besides the honor and, of course they had a winner's mentality, so, they took a lot of honor and glory in winning, but the main thing was also to use it on social media to attract personal training clients. And, to show like I'm capable of building this body. Now, one thing that I think was interesting in India is that whereas they were often also personal trainers, they also were clients of international bodybuilders. Now, you asked me earlier what was the difference, and there you get also a bit of, the international brand. You want to seek the guidance of a bodybuilder that you admire, who's been on the Mr. Olympia stage, the highest of the high. You want to get in touch with him.
Sorry to cut you off. Mr. Olympia is like, I don't know how to say it. Mr. Olympia is like the competition of competitions.
Yeah.
If you're a Mr. Olympia, you are something else. You're the god of bodybuilding.
Well, this is the one that Arnold Schwarzenegger won, right, and made him famous. And so these are and these are very expensive guys to get knowledge from, because they also know that they're worth their money. But part of that is also their bodies are also the product of a considerable financial investment. And so to make good on that investment, that's the way to go.
I have an interesting question, and I would want to know if you have any maybe incident that you want to share. In an Indian context, now when we look at the average Indian structure, Maybe in some states it's a bit different, like a Haryana or Punjab. But generally, the average Indian man, and I think there's enough research also which shows that structurally is maybe not as tall, on not as physically large and
Yeah.
structured. Uh, Bodybuilders, because they train and they would then become muscular, they would take in enough nutrients and maybe sometimes chemical substances. When they become big, did you find that, or rather, where do they fit in into the Indian context? What did you find different? Let's say you have a bodybuilder walking down the street, at a railway station, in a mall. What is different, and how does he himself perceive, and how does Indian society look at this person?
Yeah. If you look at kind of the perspective of that muscular body, what you were asking me about, that has definitely changed in India. I've been coming to India for 25 years or so I've seen India change also a little bit.
You know India, you really know India more than living in India.
So I've seen these gyms come in, I've seen the change in Bollywood where suddenly Shah Rukh Khan would, in Om Shanti Om, would take off his shirt and would have six-pack abs, and all these other guys, Amir Khan of course, and big actors, all kind of becoming more muscular. So I think one of the points I want to make here is that the muscular body itself has become more of a middle class ideal than it was in the past. So if I also interviewed the older generation of bodybuilders that were already active in the early 2000s, and they would all tell me that their bodies generally elicited negative responses. So their parents or their neighborhood thought of them as gunda fellows, like
rough guy. True.
Tough guys, bouncers, So there was a negativity around these muscles, and I think that also had to do a little bit with how it was portrayed in movies.
Exactly.
I think the big change came with Shah Rukh Khan because suddenly he had six-pack abs, and Shah Rukh Khan was always a middle-class hero. So suddenly this whole momentum came about where people started talking about, oh, he's done it, maybe I can do it too. And then the gyms came, and it became something you as a middle class and educated male could do. And I think in the past that wasn't the case. The middle class ideal may have been a little bit of a potbelly.
Right.
It signified prosperity. One thing that the guys that I interviewed in the gyms also told me is, if you want to pursue a bodybuilding career, you need to keep in mind that your clients might actually look down upon that body still. And it also happens that they lose employment with gyms because gyms don't want to be associated with that huge muscularity. So it's a thin line to kind of, and I think a lot of that then goes to what is fashionable, what is made attractive in popular media. There is a lot of fine layering in that body, how it's portrayed in a movie, how it is made part of a TV show.
Exactly. In fact, when you say, interestingly, this reminded me that as a kid, I remember when Bollywood movies were seen, you would see a big guy would generally be a bully.
Yeah.
Is one of the henchmen of the bad guy. He just comes in there. And then slowly, I think one of the first movies I remember as a kid was Maine Pyar Kiya by Salman Khan. And he came on the scene, and there were these things of him doing one-arm push-ups. And then suddenly the hero had a body. Whereas generally it was the other way. The bad guys came in there because they would come to beat up the hero. And here the hero had a body. And then of course, there's Salman Khan and there's so many others.
This is actually the movie that propelled an earlier generation of fitness enthusiasts. It kind of the first cohort of fitness trainers who are now all in their 40s and 50s. They will refer to this movie. But that is not the movie that made it popular in India. That was, there is a sequence a bit to unpack here, but Om Shanti Om was, of course, we talked about that before. Right after that, you got Garjan.
Yes.
And there you could also see, if you look at the movies closely, you see, Amir Khan's body is a lot bigger than Shah Rukh Khan's body.
I think that's when gyms really took off because, like you rightfully said, I'm from that generation when we saw Salman Khan come in that movie.
Yeah.
But it's not like gyms started sprouting everywhere because of that movie.
Yeah.
We noticed it, but it was still the fitness guys do their fitness, the martial arts guys. It was just like a bit of acknowledgement.
Yeah.
But Om Shanti Om, Gajni, these I think were the ones which really hit.
Yeah.
And I think those who are listening probably realize how much Michael knows about Bollywood. Okay, he really knows his stuff. He knows the heroes. He knows exactly which movie. Was there any incident when you walked around with bodybuilders? Okay, maybe while watching it, what was the average man's reaction on the street? Did you ever feel that, okay, if you're walking behind and you have these 2, 3 guys walking,
Yeah.
and you can make out people look at their broad shoulders? Was there ever anything like that? Any incident that you?
Yeah, there's this scene that I also capture in my book that immediately comes to mind, and this was a chap who wanted to shine on stage. Like, he wanted to become a big bodybuilder, but he wasn't a fitness trainer. He was an IT professional. He worked, in a typical, very kind of, I think maybe at the time he was working for PayPal or something in Chennai. He was newly married, he had a kid, but he was considering going down the route of steroids and hormones because he wanted to grow his body even bigger. And he was already a huge guy. And I remember sitting with him in the canteen of the IT company that employed him. I think it was PayPal, but it could have been any of these companies really that were doing work there. He was a manager there. And we were sitting, and I could feel the staring, and he said, "This is always for me," and I got it too because he was wearing a suit, or at least like a pantaloon, like leather shoes, office dress, rolled up sleeves. But you could see how massively muscular he was from a distance. And the funny thing is, on the one hand, he relished in that, but on the other hand, there was also no escape from it because he was already a big guy. And he was going to make himself even bigger. And our conversation was always about what's the point? Why would you want to do that? Because he was making, he had a very decent income with his IT company. And, he was about to risk his health also with going into the controlled substances to blow up his body, which comes with all sorts of risks.
In fact, this, interestingly, what you mentioned about him, he was earning well. Still he was trying, he wanted to try. This is something I've seen over the years, over the decades in the industry, that there was a time when a gym instructor came from a certain sort of level of income, a certain intellect. And as time has gone and we have now gyms which are not just bodybuilding gyms. Now you have MMA style, you have your functional fitness, there's various styles now. Gyms are not just bodybuilding. When I was a teen, a gym meant just getting there, it's like men and there's dumbbells. And that's about it. There's no other avenue, there's nothing else. Martial arts, you would have to go to a karate class and do it. MMA really wasn't there back then. And interestingly, like you said, how this gentleman wanted to get into bodybuilding, even though he was working in an office. I've seen trainers now come from a different segment. Now there could be a middle class guy sometimes who quit jobs. They just quit and then they get into the fitness field. And sometimes, I do, having been in the field and seen it, the financial side, I sometimes tell them, really think well, because you can love something, but to make it your lifestyle or to make it your profession is a very different thing. It might be great to go to a gym and work out. Is it great to earn from being in the gym? It's sometimes a very different sort of segment. And many people who come in, especially from established middle class, like what we are talking, a lot of kids love it. And they sometimes tell me, I have students who ask me many times, I want to be a sports science guy like you. I want to be the strength and conditioning specialist. And I say, don't even think about it. If you've got other options. A few of us have been lucky to get in there, but it's a tough world. It's a very small world, and a few guys make it. And it's not like maybe IT or maybe medicine, where you become a doctor.
This was exactly what we talked about repeatedly when meeting him for, a coffee or in some other place, or, attending a competition where he competed in. The conversation was in a sense always the same. He would sometimes ask me, what would you advise me, Michael? And I said, well, this is only a decision you can make. But I think, because I always thought when I met him, when he was at his healthiest and he hadn't really transgressed into steroids and growth hormones yet, I thought, well, if I looked like you, I would already be pretty happy, because he looked really good. He was a good-looking guy. He had a fantastic set of muscles. He was clearly the admiration at his company, but it wasn't enough. And I think we don't talk about that enough, is that for a lot of these guys, this also becomes an addiction.
Yes, absolutely.
And that addiction really relates to issues of body dysmorphia. He had long stopped being able to see himself in the mirror the way I saw him. The way I saw him was like, you know, he'd walked off a Roman pedestal, you know. You know, he was carved, he was ripped. In his eyes, there was no way close to the definition that he wanted to have. And he was also gonna he had a certain sort of tendency towards wanting to take further risk with that, which were at odds with his career, which actually took his attention away from his career, but also from his family. Had a lovely wife, a young kid. There was enough, but it wasn't.
In fact, my next question now is regarding, you said wife. Where do women fit in? What have you found, you know, in India especially, you know, in bodybuilding and in the whole muscular India, where there's more gyms, there's people. I think there's, of course, now there are women trainers who are out there. There's a few, but again, what have you found with women? Is there any specific thing, especially from a bodybuilding point of view?
Yeah.
Are there more women competing now?
Oh, absolutely. That's really changed. So really, from when I started looking into this in Delhi, when I lived in Delhi, you know, you would have like in the season sometimes within the matter of 2 weeks, you would have 3 different Mr. Delhi competitions or Mr. India competitions. But no women. In fact, not only no women on stage performing or competing, no women in the audience as well.
Exactly, I remember.
That has changed completely. It's become much bigger than that. Whole families will be attending, mothers, sisters, but also on stage there will be separate female bodybuilding competitions. India has some very, very well-known female bodybuilders.
Because we had done, I remember one interview in
Rita,
yes.
So, you know, I mean, she was an absolute star, a pathbreaker, and she will be able to tell you also of the earliest scene when she was one of the few doing that. Now it's definitely going to increase. Actually, last week I was in coaching for the Biennale, the Art Biennale, and there was an exhibition by, I think she's actually a Tamil photographer who did a setup with pictures of female bodybuilders. But of course it's still stigmatized, as muscularity among women is almost globally. So if you look at what is popular in Hollywood, really not that different from Bollywood. Thinness might differ a little bit, but when it comes to being overly muscular, usually frowned upon. Now, I'm 51, so I am old enough to remember the peak years of Madonna, the singer. And she was always criticized for that as well. She was a professional dancer. She was always a very muscular dancer, and that was always frowned upon. So there is still, I think a big difference there is that when men are muscular, it generally is thought to look good on them. When it is on women, it's generally thought to there's something upsetting about that. So another thing I think is that when women set out to do that in India, they really have to break through a whole set of more conventions there.
Even sports sometimes. And
this is not just about, you know, I mean, I've seen that change as well. Like you have women-only gyms now, but you know, women membership in gyms in general across India has increased. But this has a lot to do with, you know, on a bodybuilding stage, you need to be in a bikini.
Exactly what I was thinking. In fact, I can't remember when I used to, back in probably decades ago, I've been to competition. I haven't seen, you know, there was no women's competition. And now I did see some posts somewhere, and I was like, wow, women have the sort of, you know, they can go, and it's great to see. But I've always looked at it from the audience point of view. Is the audience of that caliber to appreciate that? Or is it like more eye candy? And
I think a lot of the way it works because I've talked to these guys as well, like they perform in the tiniest of underwear, and you know, the funny thing is you would never ever walk around in underwear like that in the street, but in front of 5,000 people on stage you can. So what is that about? And part of that is, of course, the whole setup. It becomes maybe a bit social sciencey now, a bit academic, but there is something about what the stage then does, where it belongs there. And suddenly it's not so funny anymore. But if you recall, the cover of my book was the pictures taken by Kop Shiva of this bodybuilder from, he works in a gym in Indranagar, Abhishek Gowda. And what Kop wanted to do, the photographer, he wanted to photograph different people in public space in Bangalore. You know, different people who'd come from outside the city into the city, and one of them was Abhishek. And Abhishek was a bodybuilder, but a lot of the other people were different people. They came from Mysore or from, you know, Mangalore, and Abhishek himself came from Kurk. And so he put him in front of this beautification mural near a flyover kind of this spot. And very quickly he attracted a huge crowd. And I remember Abhishek telling me, he said it was so odd to be doing that because he was there in his underwear posing. Whereas, you know, if this had been any place, any bodybuilding competition, he wouldn't have thought twice about it. Or even in the gym, because it belongs there. And I think it works partly for female bodybuilders like that as well. You know, in the moment in space, it does belong there. People expect you there and expect you to look like that. But still convincing their parents, their community, with all the expectations in India being, in that sense, still quite conservative. Yeah, so these women are, you know, I always think of them as real heroes because they really have to,
seriously, to go ahead.
you know, fight a lot of toxic masculinity around them. Yeah.
Now my last question, okay, and this is where I think bodybuilding, when we hear the word bodybuilding, bodybuilders, for the average man out there, any person, the first thing probably that comes, maybe the negative side is huge muscles built because of anabolic steroids.
Yeah.
And there's pills and injections and everything out there. And sadly, it is one of those sad realities of the sport that you want to get that big and still be muscular and ripped and every muscle seen. It is of course not just the anabolics, but it is also that without that you can't do that as well.
Yeah.
You would be of course dieting, there'd be discipline, there'd be, you know, eating right, you know, water intake, everything. But I call it like the icing on the cake, sometimes it's called, but sometimes it's like you need it. It's not even the icing on the cake, maybe it is part of the cake.
Yeah.
It's like, it's almost a strange relationship where you want to be muscular, you want to be big, there's discipline, but all the discipline and without the anabolics, you're not getting there.
No.
You can't be a Mr. Olympia without the anabolics, no matter what else you do.
No.
And what have you seen in this, and what advice would you give to many young people out there, you know, who gets, maybe they look at a picture of a Schwarzenegger or Ronnie Coleman or so many bodybuilding stars, that I want to be like that, maybe I want to be this big guy who walks, people look at me, but then I have to take some stuff.
You know, the thing is, I mean, my first reaction, of course, is don't. Just don't, you know, just don't do it. Not worth the risk. But I know that in practice it won't work that way, and I know all of us on planet Earth take risks that we shouldn't be taking. So some people drink too much or smoke too much, so we all do things with our bodies which are unhealthy. So at the same time, I don't want to become a holier than thou person about this whole thing and stigmatize bodybuilders, where a lot of us do stupid things with our body. I think a case can be made that bodybuilders probably think a lot harder about the risk than most of us do when we smoke a pack of cigarettes or we drink too much alcohol, which can also produce cancer. I think the big difference though is that what I've seen with bodybuilders is that getting the stuff is one problem. It's very expensive. The other is you have absolutely no control over the quality. So this is something that came up in interviews time and again, that they would rely on their guru. You know, they would say, no, my guru provides me with the training, will get it for me. But there were all sorts of issues of quality control that they had, in a sense, no control over. And that also really, I mean, some of the people I've interviewed and followed, aren't there anymore. And I think this should be a warning for any person, kind of considering that the excesses of bodybuilding can really have an impact on the body, and I've seen that up close with people I've interviewed. Now again, I'm a doctor of anthropology. I'm not a doctor of medicine. So in the end, my advice is just what I've seen. I did think another thing to keep in mind is that where in the past really the avenue was only bodybuilding to shine on stage, I've in recent years really seen a lot of fitness trainers who do not do anabolic steroids or growth hormone use like Facebook and Instagram as their stage. So it's not the only stage anymore where you can be admired, where you can get your personal training clients. So I've over the years also followed a lot of guys who would never consider it. That said, I think another easy mistake to make is to think that the only dangerous thing about it are anabolic steroids and growth hormones, because they are the most excessive, they're the least readily available, they're the most costly. Another one is diuretics and extreme dieting habits, and there we actually also see a lot of, these things can have a real impact on the heart, a real impact on your body. People go too far to look dry, and it's not for everyone. This is another thing. We all try to mold our bodies, right? Each and every one of us have ideas of our body because that's what we live with. But the body sometimes just doesn't want to go that certain direction. And you, as a coach, trainer, know that not everybody is suitable for every sport. And it's with bodybuilding also a little bit. Like I've come across guys who, they are skinny and lean guys, and bodybuilding isn't necessarily the kindest sport for you to want to become bigger. They're consuming massive amounts of protein, but that's very heavy on the body. These protein powders are everywhere now, and that's
very expensive.
Yeah, they're expensive. You don't really know what is in these boxes. That's another thing. You go to a Kirana shop. Do you really think that always what they advertise on the box is exactly what it is? But besides that, also all that meat, all that protein can have itself all sorts of taxing effects on the body, on the liver, on the kidneys. Then on top of that, all kind of sort of, to watch a bodybuilding competition, bodybuilders stop taking water at some point.
Yes.
So dehydration, looking dry. So there are a lot of health issues that paradoxically are about what we all think of a very healthy person, a healthy athletic body.
I think what you've mentioned, and I think people should realize, I look at bodybuilding, competitive bodybuilding now. Bodybuilding, when we go to a gym and we are lifting weights, we are all doing bodybuilding in a way. Shoulder press because we want the shoulders to get strong, maybe a bit bigger. But we are all sort of using techniques from there. I use a lot of it in my own training. There are so many, during especially the endurance phase, the hypertrophy phase, we put athletes on certain bodybuilding principles. Not throughout the year, a few months probably. But I think we need to understand competitive bodybuilding, for those who are listening, is that competitive bodybuilding is like maybe motorcycle racing. It's extreme and there's a risk. Motorcycle racing is not something which has no risk, it can really cause damage, but people do it. It's like any extreme sport, and some people, like you said, they get a kick out of doing some things. It has its risk, but that itself is probably the addiction to that risk, and bodybuilding falls in that category. My suggestion as a coach, I always say, use the principles of bodybuilding, be strong, train. Anabolic steroids, stay away unless you really know what you're doing, and nobody is going to judge you. It's you who has to judge yourself, right? Who is anybody else to tell a third person don't ride a motorcycle fast or don't ride a car fast? It's your choice. But I think if you can do it without it as well, there's a lot of beautiful things. The discipline of dieting, I think that's something which the common person can learn from a bodybuilder so much, of what not to eat, to ensure that you train even when you don't feel like it, to ensure that you follow a lifestyle. Bodybuilders have a very strict lifestyle. They're not partying in the night, going out. It will affect their body.
No.
So I think there's loads which we can learn. What do you think we can learn
Yeah,
from
I think maybe
bodybuilders?
as a final thing I can say, and I do that too when I give academic talks, right? And you know, usually I show some pictures of the guys that I've interviewed, and obviously I don't look like that. But the funny thing is, the moment these pictures come on the big screen, I always see people start getting uncomfortable and about themselves. I can pick up on that, and people start thinking, wow, this guy looks really ripped. I should really go to the gym more. I should really watch my weight. And then I take a moment out of the talk that I give and I say, well, you just kindly look around yourself and see in this audience, you know, whether there is 100 or 200 people in the audience, if there is anyone remotely looking like the guy I'm now putting on the screen. You know, just to keep it real, almost nobody looks like that. Even when you go into the gym, almost nobody looks like that. So this should not be immediately your goal. To look like something that almost nobody looks like. It's a bit like asking yourself, like you go onto the soccer field and then to be as good as Messi. Like, if that is your idea of these things, like, be realistic. How attainable that goal is. I think most of us already find it quite a challenge to simply get like 5 to 10,000 steps in on a day. Watch what we eat a little bit, don't drink and smoke too much, and live a generally healthy life. That is already hard enough.
Perfect. I think Michael has mentioned a lot of things. His book, Muscular India, is available on Amazon. I would suggest read it. It gives a fantastic sort of, you know, a different view. It's not a bodybuilding book, but it is a bodybuilding book. You know, that's the unique part about it, I think, you know. And he's done his research, and I think your whole knowledge of Bollywood is what people will be surprised about, like how he really knows his stuff. He's done his work. And I think from the book, you can see he's on Facebook. I'll be putting this video on Facebook as well, tagging his Instagram too. So nice guy to know, and I think you do write for Economic Times as well, right?
Yeah, I do a travel column once a month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So great to sort of know and follow him as well. But thanks, Michael, for this. I think perfect interview.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Super.
you.